Ukraine and Russia are exchanging fire on multiple fronts. Bridges are being destroyed, cities are burning, and oil depots are under attack.
Rescue workers say one person died and 26 were injured.
At least 7 people were injured in a missile strike, while 2 others were hospitalized, and 23 private homes, 12 apartment buildings, and a post office suffered damage.
Over the Eastern Front, the night sky was never calm again. Russia has flooded Ukraine with drones in an attempt to overwhelm its defenses, break through its cities, and kill its soldiers. They launched 180 unmanned craft on this one night alone, including some inexpensive Shaheds loaded with explosives and reconnaissance units that directed artillery battery fire. 120 tanks roared forward across muddy terrain beside this aerial storm, their tracks making scars in the ground as their turrets swung. Moscow desired a breakthrough, a decisive action to demoralize Ukrainians. However, the attack became a firestorm that left Russia reeling, and the reverse happened. The initial drones, whose sheer quantity was intended to overwhelm Ukrainian anti-air defenses, showed up on radar like a cloud of gnats. Ukraine, however, had discovered. Drone swarms for months had compelled innovation. The larger drones were knocked out by shoulder-fired missiles, electronic warfare confused navigation systems, and operators lit up the sky with artillery from mobile weapons. Before they could reach their targets, dozens fell, exploding in the darkness like flaming stars.
Biggest Russian drone and missile attack of the war. Ukraine says Moscow fired 550 drones and 11 missiles overnight.
To Russia launching a massive aerial assault against Ukraine, the biggest since the invasion more than 3 years ago.
All right, in other news, Russia has conducted fresh strikes on Ukraine's Zaporizhia region. Ukraine says Russian forces carried out 567 attacks over the last 24 hours.
The ones that survived crashed into decoys, which Ukraine had strewn over the countryside and included wooden tanks, phony radar stations, and fictitious artillery positions. While the actual placements remained concealed and unaltered, explosions illuminated vacant fields. In the meantime, Russian tanks advanced in close formation in an attempt to take advantage of openings. They were unaware of the meticulous preparation of the ground. Their route was lined with minefields, which led them into well-known passageways where Ukrainian artillery was already aimed. The lead vehicle was struck by the initial blast, which caused its turret to flip skyward in a cloud of black smoke. There were additional explosions, and panic shook the column. Some tanks' thinner side armor was seen as they veered. That's when the NLAWs and Javelins hit. With their missiles blazing into the night and piercing steel, Ukrainian infantry concealed in tree lines shot precisely. The advance stalled in a matter of minutes, with Russian engines blazing and workers abandoning their cars as mayhem broke out. The actual strike, however, came from above. Carefully preserved and relocated, HIMARS systems fired rocket salvos under the guidance of real-time drone observation. Supply trucks and fuel carriers that had been pushed too near to the front were chained across by secondary explosions as each strike ripped through groups of armor. With a line of fire spanning kilometers, the battlefield was illuminated in orange. According to soldiers, it was like the earth itself erupting, consuming everything in its path like a man-made volcano. The conflagration was uncontrollable by the time Russian leaders regrouped and ordered the remaining tanks to push through. While loitering drones pursued survivors sheltering in fields, precision-guided artillery killed stragglers. It was incredibly expensive. In a single night, over half of the 120 tanks were damaged or rendered inoperable. Nearly every drone in the swarm was neutralized, either shot down, jammed, or fooled into hitting fictitious targets. Ukraine destroyed the massive resources that Russia had placed into the attack. Just as significant as the bodily hit was the psychological one. Videos became viral on the internet in a matter of hours. Russian soldiers fleeing in chaos, scorched tanks, and drone bits strewn about like toys. Ukrainian soldiers recorded themselves shouting into the smoke-filled air while standing on captured armor and waving flags. Moscow's powerful attack had failed, and the message was obvious. Then an unforeseen event occurred. Instead of retreating to reorganize, Ukrainian forces advanced. Knowing that Russia would attempt to overrun them, they had been waiting for weeks while storing ammunition. Ukrainian units counterattacked as soon as enemy lines were breached. Destroyed tanks opened holes that mechanized units pushed into, hitting supply dumps, seizing trenches, and blocking escape routes. Stunned by the unsuccessful onslaught, Russian forces were unexpectedly forced to defend themselves. A planned strike ended in a crushing defeat. Fireballs that illuminated the horizon for miles were produced in one region by Ukrainian special forces using quadcopters to drop explosives directly upon gasoline convoys. In another, armored vehicles were able to advance deeper after engineers hurried forward to clear pathways across minefields. The counterattack wasn't careless. Rather, it was well-planned, precise, and intended to take advantage of the particular vulnerabilities that Russia's arrogance had revealed. Each tank that was destroyed served as cover for infantry that was moving forward. Each drone that was shot down served as propaganda, demonstrating that Ukraine was capable of both surviving and retaliating. Ukrainian units were reported to have advanced several kilometers beyond the initial front line by morning. Communications in Russia were a mess. Some units were encircled by pockets and completely cut off. Confusion, yelling commands that contradicted one another, and soldiers refusing to drive blazing tanks into certain death were all described by prisoners. Normally quick to proclaim victory, Russian official media remained mute for hours before making evasive remarks about tactical regrouping. However, nobody was able to conceal the magnitude of the catastrophe. The following day, satellite photos revealed fields dotted with charred wrecks, with lengthy crater lines indicating the locations where rockets had ripped through convoys. The victory was symbolic for Ukraine in addition to being tactical. The picture of 180 drones and 120 tanks transforming into a conflagration served as a rallying cry. People watched the video on their phones and cheered in shelters and cafes. Motivated by the momentum, soldiers on leave hurried back to their regiments. The strike strengthened Ukraine's argument for greater long-range weaponry, air defenses, and weapons on a global scale. Impressed by Ukraine's defenses' effectiveness and tenacity, Western leaders promised more assistance, letting Moscow know that escalation would only make Kiev's friends stronger. Meanwhile, Russia had to answer difficult questions. Why had one push committed so many tanks? Why, in spite of the enormous resources invested in them, have drone swarms failed? Overconfidence, a lack of coordination, and an underestimate of Ukrainian adaptation were noted by military analysts. Others implied desperation, arguing that Moscow wanted a symbolic victory but ended up losing. The losses put a burden on morale in addition to material supplies. Soldiers sent somber communications home, detailing the impression of fighting an unwinnable war, fields of blazing armor, and colleagues slain in explosions. The subsequent events cemented the moment as a pivotal moment. Ukraine conducted additional attacks behind Russian lines in the days after the fight, focusing on command headquarters and munitions dumps. Russia was forced to withdraw from a number of positions that it had spent months securing as each hit added to the chaos. Unquestionably, but not significantly, the momentum changed. The initiative truly belonged to Ukraine for the first time in weeks. Not only did the Firestorm cause damage, but it also transformed defense into offense and hopelessness into resolve. Nevertheless, the conflict continued to be harsh, tiresome, and unpredictable. Both sides were aware that gains could be brittle and victory could be fleeting. But Ukraine addressed the challenge with shrewdness, accuracy, and firepower. That night when Russia unleashed its war machines in overwhelming numbers. 120 tanks erupted into flaming husks. 180 drones became falling stars. And the battlefield became a conflagration that engulfed Moscow's aspirations. Not only did they survive the conflagration, but they also showed defiance. It was evidence that the will to resist might change the course of events even when the odds were stacked against you, and that sometimes the enemy breaks you the hardest when they try to break you.